What if I told you that a poisonous, dirt-covered weed from the Andes Mountains is the secret reason modern civilization exists today? For thousands of years, this toxic root carried the power to build empires, trigger the deadliest famines in human history, and even pioneer humanity's journey to Mars. Before we dig into this incredible story, hit that subscribe button, leave a quick like, and share this video with someone who thinks history is boring. Let's prove them wrong together. Long before it became the world's favorite comfort food, the potato was a botanical survivor, thriving in one of the most hostile environments on Earth. High above the cloud line in the Andes Mountains of South America, across the freezing, windswept plateaus of modern-day Peru and Bolivia, wild potato plants struggled to grow in rocky, unforgiving soil. At altitudes exceeding 12,000 feet, the air is thin, the nights are brutally cold, and very few crops can survive. Yet, roughly 8,000 years ago, ancient foragers noticed these rugged little plants producing underground tubers. They did not look like the plump, golden vegetables stacked in our grocery stores today. They were small, often no larger than a hazelnut or a walnut with thick, gnarled skins. More importantly, they were packed look like the plump, golden vegetables stacked in our grocery stores today. They were small, often no larger than a hazelnut or a walnut with thick, gnarled skins. More importantly, they were packed with potent natural chemical defenses. To survive against insects, pests, and disease, wild potatoes produced dense concentrations of toxic chemical compounds called glycoalkaloids. If a human being tried to eat these raw wild tubers, the results were horrific. Severe stomach cramps, dizziness, violent vomiting, internal hemorrhaging, and even nervous system shutdown would follow. Eating wild potatoes was a gamble with death, and many early mountain dwellers learned that lesson through agonizing trial and error. Yet those ancient indigenous foragers did not simply walk away from this toxic mountain weed. They recognized that behind the poison lay a dense treasure of carbohydrates, a guaranteed source of energy that could survive freezing temperatures where corn and beans would instantly die. The challenge was not finding food. The challenge was deprogramming nature's poison. Over countless generations, families living across the Altiplano developed a sophisticated, multi-step chemical engineering process without ever having a modern laboratory. First, they learned that soaking the freshly harvested tubers in freezing mountain streams for several days would gradually leach out water-soluble toxins. But soaking alone was not enough. To break down the remaining cellular poisons and preserve the harvest, they invented what historians consider the world's very first freeze-drying technique. During the harsh Andean winter, families would spread the soaked tubers across flat, open rocks at night, allowing the bitter mountain frost to freeze them solid. As the morning sun rose and warmed the thin mountain air, the tubers thawed. Families would then walk barefoot across the softened vegetables, stomping rhythmically to squeeze out the trapped liquid inside the cell walls. They repeated this cycle of deep freezing, thawing, and crushing day after day until the potatoes were completely stripped of moisture and toxins. What remained was a chalky, bone-dry, lightweight nugget known as chuño. This humble creation changed the trajectory of human agriculture forever. Chuño weighed almost nothing, making it easy to transport across treacherous mountain passes. Even more astonishingly, in a world lacking electricity or refrigeration, chuño could be stored in stone warehouses for 10, 15, or even 20 years without rotting or losing its nutritional value. This miraculous preservation method became the engine of the mighty Inca Empire. When the Inca rose to dominate western South America in the 15th century, their power was not just built on stone temples and bronze weapons. It was built on a foundation of stored carbohydrates. The Inca constructed vast networks of state-controlled storehouses filled to the brim with freeze-dried potatoes. If a severe drought struck a highland province, the central government opened the warehouses and prevented famine. When Inca armies marched across thousands of miles of rugged terrain to expand their borders, soldiers carried sacks of chuño to fuel their grueling campaigns. The plant became so deeply intertwined with daily existence that Inca farmers cultivated thousands of distinct varieties, breeding potatoes that were deep purple, bright yellow, crimson red, and jet black. They possessed an intimate agricultural science, matching specific tuber shapes and colors to precise altitudes, soil compositions, and microclimates across the mountain slopes. In fact, Inca society measured time by how long it took to boil a pot of potatoes, and they measured travel distances by how many sacks of chuño a traveler required to reach the next settlement. The potato was the undisputed lifeblood of a massive civilization. Then, in the early 16th century, Spanish conquistadors swept across the Andes with iron swords and gunpowder. The Spaniards were blinded by an obsession with gold and silver. They looted temples, forced indigenous populations into brutal silver mines, and shipped endless tons of precious metals back to Europe. In their desperate greed for treasure, the conquerors completely ignored the true wealth buried beneath their boots. Spanish chroniclers noted that the indigenous people ate a strange, lumpy root, but the European invaders viewed it as primitive animal treasure. The conquerors completely ignored the true wealth buried beneath their boots. Spanish chroniclers noted that the indigenous people ate a strange, lumpy root, but the European invaders viewed it as primitive animal feed or peasant garbage. Around the 1570s, Spanish sailors began tossing a few sacks of these tubers into the holds of their ships. They had noticed that sailors who ate them during long oceanic crossings resisted scurvy, though they did not yet understand the science of vitamin C. When Spanish ships finally returned to the Iberian Peninsula, they brought the potato along as a mere botanical curiosity, donating small batches to monasteries and hospital gardens to feed the chronically ill and destitute. There was no fanfare, no royal proclamation, and certainly no celebration. The European continent had just received the greatest agricultural gift in human history, and it responded with absolute disgust. If you are fascinated by how a simple root vegetable quietly steered the course of ancient civilizations, take 2 seconds right now to tap the thumbs up icon and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us uncover more incredible historical secrets every single week. As the potato slowly traveled beyond Spain into the heart of Europe during the 17th century, it collided with a root vegetable, quietly steered the course of ancient civilizations. Take 2 seconds right now to tap the thumbs up icon and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us uncover more incredible historical secrets every single week. As the potato slowly traveled beyond Spain into the heart of Europe during the 17th century, it collided with a deeply entrenched cultural and religious wall. To understand the hostility that followed, you have to look at how Europeans viewed food and nature at the time. For centuries, European agriculture and feudal economics revolved around noble grains. Wheat, barley, rye, and oats were planted in open furrows. They reached upward toward the sun and ripened under the open sky. Bread made from grain was considered sacred, blessed by tradition, and central to religious ritual. Blessed by tradition and central to religious rituals. Grain was clean. Familiar, and heavenly. The potato, by contrast, grew underground in the dark, damp, wriggling mud. When pulled from the earth, it was misshapen, dirty, and covered in strange, wart-like growths that peasants uneasily called eyes. Botanical scholars quickly classified this strange foreign arrival into the family Solanaceae, commonly known as the nightshade family. This was a public relations disaster for the potato. The nightshade family included some of the most feared and deadly poisonous plants in Europe, such as deadly nightshade, henbane, and mandrake, plants associated for centuries with witchcraft, poison, and dark magic. Because the potato's delicate leaves and flowers closely resembled those of toxic nightshades, suspicious Europeans jumped to terrifying conclusions. Rumors spread like wildfire across the continent that eating this underground monster would corrupt the human body. In parts of France, physicians blamed potatoes for causing leprosy, claiming that the rough, lumpy skin of the tuber would cause human skin to blister and rot. In 1596, lawmakers in the French city of Besançon officially banned the cultivation of potatoes, declaring that the plant spread unstoppable disease through the soil. The panic was not limited to France. Across Germany and Switzerland, folk legends warned that eating potatoes caused scrofula, a horrifying tubercular swelling of the neck glands, alongside excessive flatulence and immoral desires. In Russia, devout Orthodox clergymen denounced the tuber as the devil's apple, convincing thousands of peasants that planting it was a direct sin against God. In Scotland, Presbyterian ministers thundered from their pulpits against the crop, arguing that because the word potato did not appear anywhere in the Holy Bible, God clearly never intended it for human consumption. For nearly 200 years, this nutrient-dense superfood sat quarantined in the ornamental gardens of wealthy aristocrats. Upper-class elites grew the plants strictly to admire their pretty purple and white flowers. Queen Marie Antoinette famously pinned potato blossoms into her elaborate hairstyles during royal balls. King Louis XVI wore them in his buttonhole. Yet, when it came to actually putting the tubers on a dinner plate, European society turned up its nose, leaving millions of impoverished laborers to suffer through seasonal grain shortages while the cure for their hunger remained buried right beneath their feet. It took war, famine, and psychological manipulation to break this 200-year prejudice. The first major turning point arrived in the Kingdom of Prussia during the mid-18th century. King Frederick II, remembered today as Frederick the Great, found his nation locked in devastating military conflicts across Europe. During the 7 Years' War, invading armies repeatedly adopted scorched earth tactics, burning Prussian wheat and rye fields to the ground to starve the local population into surrender. Frederick realized that grain was a severe strategic vulnerability. Fire destroyed standing wheat in minutes, but a crop that grew 6 inches beneath the soil was practically invincible to surface fires and marching cavalry boots. An entire army could trample across a potato field without ever destroying the underground harvest. In 1756, Frederick issued a royal decree ordering all Prussian peasants to plant potatoes across their fields. The peasantry fiercely resisted. In one famous historical incident, the citizens of the town of Kolberg sent a petition back to the king protesting that the strange roots had no smell, no taste, and were so repulsive that not even their street dogs would eat them. Frederick recognized that brute force and threats would never change deep-seated psychological disgust. So he devised a brilliant piece of reverse psychology. He planted a massive royal potato field right on the outskirts of Berlin. Then he dispatched elite royal guards in full military dress to surround the field and protect it day and night. The instructions given to the guards were secret and specific. Stand tall and look intimidating during the day, but pretend to fall asleep or look the other way as soon as darkness fell. The psychological trick worked like magic. The local peasants saw the heavy security and instantly reasoned that anything guarded by the king's personal army must be incredibly valuable. Under the cover of night, curious villagers crept into the royal gardens, stole seed potatoes right out of the dirt, and smuggled them back to their own private garden plots. Of boiled potatoes, Parmentier fully expected to become violently ill, lose his mind, or die of leprosy. Instead, when he was finally released at the end of the war, he emerged from prison in fantastic physical condition, healthier and stronger than many French soldiers who had lived on traditional rations. He returned to Paris with a burning, lifelong mission. He would destroy French ignorance and make the potato the national food of France. Parmentier launched an ingenious public awareness campaign that rivaled modern corporate marketing. He hosted luxurious, high-profile, mysterious royal harvest. By the time the French Revolution erupted in the late 18th century, the potato had finally shed its toxic reputation. It became celebrated as the food of the people, capable of feeding a hungry nation when grain crops failed. We are approaching the most tragic and astonishing chapter of this story. So if you haven't subscribed yet, click that red button and turn on notifications right now. You don't want to miss our deep dives into the hidden forces shaping our world. While continental Europe was slowly discovering the life-saving potential of the potato through clever persuasion, a very different and far more dangerous experiment was unfolding across the Irish Sea. In Ireland, the adoption of the potato did not happen through gentle marketing. It was forged by brutal political and economic survival. During the 17th and 18th centuries, Ireland was subjected to harsh colonial rule under the British Crown. A complex web of discriminatory legal statutes, known as the penal laws, systematically stripped the native Catholic population of their basic civil rights. Irish Catholics were forbidden from purchasing land, barred from entering professions, and prohibited from passing down estates intact. Over generations, vast tracts of fertile land were seized and handed over to wealthy, absentee English and Anglo-Irish Protestant landlords who lived off rental income while residing comfortably in London or Dublin. The native Irish population was pushed onto tiny, marginal plots of rocky, windswept land, especially across the western provinces of Connaught and Munster. Millions of tenant farmers were forced into an impossible economic corner. They had to grow high-value cash crops like wheat, barley, and oats, alongside raising cattle and pigs, simply to pay their exorbitant annual rent to the absentee landlords. If they failed to pay, they were evicted instantly and left to die on the roadsides. The tenant families could not afford to eat the grain or livestock they produced. Every ounce of it had to be exported to English markets for cash, to feed themselves and their children on the tiny patches of poor soil remaining around their mud cabins. The Irish peasantry desperately needed a miracle crop. The potato was that miracle. The cool, damp, rainy climate of Ireland, which often ruined delicate grain harvests, proved absolute perfection for underground tubers. An Irish farmer armed with nothing more than a simple spade could plant potatoes in raised beds, known as lazy beds, across steep hillsides and waterlogged bogs where traditional plows could never operate. The biological efficiency was staggering. Just one single acre of land planted with potatoes could yield up to 12 tons of food, enough to sustain a family of 6, along with a pig and a cow, for an entire year. Furthermore, the nutritional profile of a diet based entirely on potatoes and slightly soured skimmed milk, known as buttermilk, was surprisingly complete. While modern dietary advice warns against eating only one food, this simple Irish diet provided complex carbohydrates, essential amino acids, iron, potassium, dietary fiber, and massive amounts of vitamin C. Physical assessments from the early 19th century revealed that Irish peasant laborers, despite their extreme financial poverty, were on average taller, stronger, and suffered fewer chronic illnesses than the industrial working classes living on bread and tea in English factory cities. Fueled by this limitless nutritional abundance, Ireland experienced an unprecedented demographic explosion. In the year 1700, the population stood at roughly 2.5 million people. By By the early 1840s, that number had skyrocketed past 8 million. But underneath this thriving population lay a fatal, hidden biological trap. Because tenant farmers needed the absolute highest yield possible from the smallest scraps of land, they abandoned thousands of diverse potato varieties and converged almost exclusively on a single strain known as the Irish lumper. The lumper was a large, knobby, watery potato that tasted rather bland, but it produced colossal quantities of tubers in poor soil. Here is the scientific catch. Unlike grain crops grown from seeds, potatoes are propagated vegetatively by planting cuttings of the tubers themselves. Every single Irish lumper growing across millions of acres was an exact genetic clone of every other lumper in the country. There was no genetic variation, no natural evolutionary defense, and no biodiversity waiting in reserve. An entire nation of 8 million human beings had built its physical survival on a single genetic thread. In the late summer of 1845, the biological time bomb detonated. Merchant ships sailing from North America across the Atlantic docked in European ports, carrying cargo holds packed with trade goods. Hidden invisibly inside the imported potatoes were microscopic fungal-like spores of a water mold called Phytophthora infestans. When airborne spores of this deadly organism drifted across the English Channel and landed on the damp fields of Ireland, they found an endless, genetically uniform paradise. The cool, foggy, humid summer of 1845 provided ideal conditions for the pathogen to multiply at terrifying speeds. The destruction was swift and apocalyptic. Farmers walked out to their lush green fields one evening only to return the next morning. When terrified families dug frantically into the earth to save their subterranean food supply, they found that the tubers had already dissolved into a foul, putrid mush that emitted a sickening, unmistakable stench of decay. In the first year, roughly 1/3 of the entire meager reserves, praying that the failure was a one-time weather anomaly. They were wrong. In 1846, the blight returned with double the ferocity, entirely wiping out the potato harvest across all 32 counties. The families who had eaten nothing but potatoes for generations suddenly had nothing at all. Starvation gripped the countryside with terrifying speed. Without food to eat, bodies wasted away into living skeletons. Desperate parents boiled grass, seaweeds, nettles, and even leather shoes to quiet the crying of their children. As severe malnutrition devastated immune systems through the crowded mud cabins and workhouses, killing far more people than pure starvation alone. Making the disaster infinitely worse was the cold, dogmatic response of the British imperial administration. Influenced by rigid, laissez-faire economic theories, government officials refused to halt agricultural exports from Ireland. Throughout the worst months of the famine, heavily guarded convoys down to the docks under armed military escort, leaving starving villages behind to be shipped to English consumers. Charles Trevelyan, the Treasury official placed in direct charge of Irish famine relief, publicly argued that the biological disaster was a direct judgment of God, designed to reduce a surplus population and reform Irish morals. When government relief works were eventually established, starving, physically ruined men were forced freezing rain just to earn pennies that could not buy the rapidly skyrocketing grain prices. Between 1845 and 1852, over 1 million Irish men, women, and children perished from starvation and epidemic disease. Another 2 million people fled their homeland in one of the most tragic mass migrations in recorded history. Packed like whirled as coffin ships, hundreds of thousands braved the stormy Atlantic crossing. Countless families succumbed to ship fever during the voyage, their bodies buried at sea. Those who survived landed in the ports of Boston, New York, Philadelphia, and Montreal, carrying with them nothing but their grief, their resilience, and an unshakable generational resentment toward British rule. The population of Ireland fell by nearly 25%. Ireland has never fully recovered even to this present day. Yet, out of the ashes of absolute catastrophe, the potato proved its resilience once again. The global lesson taken from the tragedy of Ireland was not that the potato was too dangerous to farm, but rather that human agriculture must never rely on a single cloned variety. Agricultural scientists and botanists launched global expeditions back to the disaster gave birth to the modern field of plant pathology and scientific crop genetics. As the 19th and 20th centuries unfolded, the potato conquered the rest of the globe with unstoppable momentum. In the vast territories of the Russian Empire, early efforts by government officials to force peasant communities to plant potatoes triggered violent uprisings known as the potato riots. Peasants feared the unfamiliar root and attacked government clerks. However, once Russian farmers realized that potatoes survived devastating frosts that destroyed their rye crops, adoption soared. By the 20th century, Russia transformed into a global potato powerhouse, and rural villages affectionately crowned the tuber with a new title, the second bread. Vodka, distilled from fermented potato starch, became a cornerstone of East European culture and economics. Across Asia, the story repeated itself with remarkable force. Chinese farmers discovered that the crop thrived in the steep, arid, mountainous provinces of Yunnan and Sichuan, where traditional flooded rice paddies were impossible to engineer. Today, China stands as the undisputed titan of global production, harvesting nearly 100 million metric tons of potatoes every single year to feed its massive population. In India, a crop originally introduced as a garden curiosity by British colonial administrators rapidly became an everyday staple. Indian cuisine embraced the vegetable so completely, infusing it with turmeric, cumin, and coriander in iconic dishes like aloo gobi and samosas, that over 1 billion people today view it as a native Indian ingredient. Across the highlands of East Africa, nations like Kenya and Rwanda have turned to intensive potato farming to combat rural malnutrition and build modern food security. Today, the potato ranks as the 4th most important food crop on the planet, standing proudly behind only rice, wheat, and corn. But its influence extends far beyond the kitchen table. Modern industrial chemistry has unlocked the hidden engineering within the potato's cellular walls. Highly refined potato starch serves as a crucial binding agent in pharmaceuticals, cosmetics, biodegradable plastics, and modern adhesives. During World War II, when Axis blockades cut off Allied and German supplies of natural rubber from Southeast Asian plantations, chemists utilized potato starch derivatives to synthesize artificial rubber for military vehicle tires. The device you're using right now to watch this video likely contains industrial components manufactured using starch-based industrial polymers. And now, this humble mountain root is preparing for its most ambitious journey yet, leaving planet Earth entirely. When aerospace engineers and plant biologists at NASA began designing closed-loop life support systems for future long-duration space missions, they needed an ultimate survival crop. In 1995, aboard the Space Shuttle Columbia, the potato officially became the very first food vegetable grown in outer space. Why did space agencies select the potato over wheat or soy? Because the biological brilliance forged inside the harsh Andes 8,000 years ago remains unmatched. A potato plant produces more calories per drop of water and per square foot of growing space than any other major crop. Its dense underground canopy protects harvestable energy from ambient space radiation. And the tubers require zero heavy processing equipment to prepare. You simply heat them and eat them. When human beings eventually establish permanent agricultural bases on the surface of the moon or inside the freezing, red dust valleys of Mars, the very first fields planted under artificial greenhouse lights will not be fields of grain. They will be fields of potatoes. Take a moment to let that sink in. A toxic, bitter weed scrambling for survival on the freezing cliffs of South America was carefully transformed by ancient indigenous science into a global powerhouse. It fueled the rise of the Inca, survived European religious paranoia, saved kingdoms from wartime starvation, triggered a migration that reshaped modern geopolitical demographics, and became the world's favorite comfort food. From the dirt of the Andes to the soil of Mars, the potato is proof that the most extraordinary revolutions often start underground. If you enjoyed this journey through history, hit subscribe right now, like the video, and leave a comment down below telling us which part of the potato story surprised you most.